Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, FPL Vincenzo here. And the pod slightly earlier in the week than normal. I wanted to do a little reaction, sort of initial thought video, we'll call it, on the Gabriel injury news. Obviously, he went off playing for Brazil, groin issue. No confirmation yet of the extent of that. If it's quite basic, I think he'd probably miss a week or two. A little bit more severe is probably more like a month to 6 weeks, which obviously coming into this point of the season could be quite a lot of game weeks. And worst case scenario, surgery would be months. But it doesn't sound like it's anything sort of that severe. But obviously a few panicking and a few sort of getting plans in place in terms of him being out. Obviously very highly owned defender, probably the best defender in the game for the last block of fixtures. What do we do now? How severe is it? Do we even need to move him on? I think the first thing for me is that, as far as I'm aware, this isn't new news. Not that it was advertised and promoted excessively, but he went into the fixture with complications, with a groin problem. And did he make it any worse playing? I've seen a clip of him going off, and it doesn't really look like he gets into full sprint and then pulls up. I think he kind of is aware already of the risk of sprinting. Maybe even he felt something at that moment. So if it was a minor problem that allowed him to play, which it obviously was because he was playing, has he made it any worse? My first thought was he stopped quite, not abruptly, but I think he knew what he was doing. I don't think this was he tried to sprint, the pain was too much, and he went down. I felt like he was already in discomfort before he started to sprint. That suggests to me he probably hasn't made it any worse. It probably isn't anything on the more serious side. My gut feeling is he's probably out for less than a month. I wouldn't be surprised if he's available in the next 2 weeks. He's already been a problem, obviously, once for me lately. I took a -4 the other week for a defender because I wasn't sure I was actually going to have 3 defenders. I had Arteta out with concussion, and Joachim Andersen had got injured. And then Gabriel was a risk as well. I was down to possibly Lacroix, who was playing away to Arsenal as well, which wasn't ideal, and Senesi. And I ended up taking a -4 to turn Andersen into TL, thinking at least I've got 3 defenders. It's worth the hit here to get 11 players. Gabriel was fine and played. So I don't know how much we trust Arsenal for accurate team news. But it's good to have a plan in place, isn't it? I won't be doing anything sudden here. I'll be looking for full information before I do anything. But if he is out for a month, then I think there's a consideration to move him on. And so when it comes to moving him on, sort of what are the sort of things we've got to consider here? So let's have a look. So here's a list on the screen right now of sort of the first questions sort of I asked myself around, if I'm selling Gabriel, what am I doing? So first question is, what impact does Gabriel have on expected Arsenal clean sheets? Obviously, he is the key component in some ways for Arsenal, particularly from an FPL perspective, but more because of the sort of propensity for DEFCON and the goal threat he has. But I think it's a lot harder to gauge on his value in terms of the clean sheets. Arsenal are certainly a well-drilled team, first and foremost. This isn't for individual superstar defenders all going above and beyond, all outperforming one-to-one duels and keeping clean sheets that way. Not that obviously defensive changes can impact defensive solidarity, but I think that the reason really Arsenal are so good defensively is because of how good they press, how intense they press, how switched on every player on the pitch is in terms of their role. And in many ways, I think it limits the actual amount of defending the Arsenal defenders have to do because of Rice and Zubimendi pressing at the right moments, because they press from the front so well, which I think is noticeable this season, that many teams are not pressing so intensely high up the pitch. I think Arsenal do. So Gabriel is clearly a loss because I think he's a very front foot defender. A lot of our other Arsenal defenders, particularly Saliba, tends to be a bit more passive and sweeper-like, where Gabriel, I think, I wouldn't call him the leader as such, but I think he is the one that's organising and making sure the Arsenal line stays high, make sure the defence pushes up the extra 4 or 5 yards so they don't get camped on the edge of their own box. Can they get up to 25 yards from goal when they're defending rather than defending the 18-yard box? And I think he's very front foot aggressive. That's his role. So without him, what happens to the Arsenal clean sheets? I think naturally the defensive line is at risk of dropping deeper. As I say, I think he's a key component of getting that defence higher. I think if it's Saliba leading in the line, they might end up just dropping an extra 5-10 yards deeper. That allows the opponent 5-10 yards closer to the Arsenal's goal. Obviously, better shooting opportunities from those areas. But I think that's a small thing. I still think it's the team system that helps Arsenal keep clean sheets. So we know, and it's no secret, that Arsenal's defence is the best in the league in terms of total clean sheets, in terms of XGC, things like that. I don't think even if Gabriel misses a month here, that changes. So if we was of the mindset before that double Arsenal defence was valid in this upcoming period, I think it's still valid. I don't think losing Gabriel and a replacement coming in is a reason enough to want to drop to one Arsenal defender. They're still the best defence in the league. I still expect them to be the best defence in the league, even though, as an example, Liverpool have, what on paper at least, look like better fixtures. I would still expect Arsenal to have better defensive numbers and keep more clean sheets in this next block than Liverpool, even if we're going to use fixture tickers and looking at what's on paper to distinguish fixture difficulty. I think Arsenal is still the best defence. So I'd still want 2 Arsenal defenders. Ideally, I still think the clean sheet total will be high. Second question, who replaces Gabriel in the Arsenal defence? Again, we've got some options here. Hincipie is probably the most likely, the most like for like, in the sense he's quite front foot dominant, quite aggressive in the tackle, and he's left footed. I think all of those factors are good for him. You've obviously got Mosquera, who's more the natural Saliba replacement, more because he's right footed. But I do think he's more aerially dominant. And I say Saliba is more the cover defender, the more the one that sweeps. The other centre-back with Saliba to form the good partnership is one that wants to go and aggressively meet the ball, the one that wants to go and aggressively win the headers and things like that. I think Mosquera is better at that than Hincipie. So it'd be interesting to see Mosquera play on the front foot. I say the issue being that because Arsenal allow Calafiori to get forward quite a lot from left back, or even Lewis Skelly could go and play inverted into midfield from left back. The left centre back is asked to defend the left hand channel quite a lot. Maybe sort of a position you'd naturally sort of associate with someone who's playing left of a back three. That's more like the channel that the left centre back has to defend in for Arsenal. I think if that's a right footed player, I think that's a lot harder. We're seeing it with Liverpool, with Van Dijk maybe having to cover Kirkes a little bit too much and it not going so well. Maybe that's one reason that Robertson started to play lately, who's not quite so aggressive with his positioning and things. So my gut feeling is here, Hincipie's going to come into the team. He's obviously played less minutes than Mosquera. He's less sort of visibility and awareness of what Premier League football is. But he is a like-for-like replacement in many ways. Not in all ways, obviously, because no one is. But logic would say he would come in here. He can comfortable in sort of left centre-back positions or left full-back positions. I think full-back is his better position, but he can play centre-back. I say he can go and play on the front foot, be aggressive, and be fine defending the channels. So that's my thought there, that it's more likely to be him than Mosquera. Next question is, what impact does the Gabriel absence have on the roles and responsibilities of other Arsenal players? I'm thinking more Yuri and Timber here. If there's a concern that the Gabriel replacement is, I won't call them a weak link in the Arsenal defence, but maybe a bit inexperienced. And we know already that Arsenal's fixture list on paper is about to get a little bit trickier with Chelsea, Villa, teams like this on the horizon. Will Arsenal change system a little bit to be a bit more defensively strong? So at the moment, the left back, Calafiori, the majority of the time is basically given full license to get forward, sometimes plays high and wide, sometimes appears in number 6 positions, number 8 positions, even at centre forward sometimes. He's got license to drift where he wants to find space. And a lot of the time as well, Timber also gets forward from right back, not quite as advanced as Calafiori. His role's maybe not quite as... doesn't get the chance to drift quite as much as Calafiori, but he still plays ahead of the 2 centre-backs. Arsenal's shape quite often is like a 2, which is the 2 centre-backs when Arsenal have got the ball, followed by a 3, which I think is often Rice, Zubimendi and Timber. And then the 5 ahead of that with Calafiori, the left mid, the 10, the striker and the right mid. I wonder if Arsenal would be consider here to go more 3-2-5 rather than 2-3-5 and be a bit more defensively sound, a little bit more protection in the last line of defence. So will no Gabriel impact Timber's attacking output? My gut feeling is it probably will. So I think naturally people here that are looking for a sideways move, if they have to sell Gabriel, might think I'll get Timber, keep my double Arsenal defence. Timber's got more upside than a Saliba or Calafiori or someone like that. I'd just be a bit cautious here. That I wouldn't be surprised if he takes on a slightly more defensively disciplined role and certainly plays more like a right centre-back in a 3 in more phases of play than he does now. Might also, if that happens, might also have an impact on Declan Rice, who may have to hold a little bit more, maybe not quite the same freedom to get forward, because if Arsenal one player short in that box in front of the defence, Rice will have to be a bit more cautious there. Also, Calafiori, if you own him, might be asked to just think about it a little bit more and not be quite so sort of dynamic in his movement. So they're the players I think that might have some knock-on consequences. Timber the most, but Rice and Calafiori as well. So then I've highlighted DEFCON defensive duties and who's the set-piece target. So as I say, Gabriel has been Arsenal's best defender for DEFCON so far. And I say one of those reasons is, I think, is because he covers that left channel quite so often, which gives him the chance to make clearances and things like that. Now, if Arsenal are going to defend deeper and have a slightly more defensive shape, which I expect, will other defenders get DEFCON? If Arsenal do end up defending the penalty box more often, so if they do play deeper and allow more crosses into the box and things like that, could that have an impact on other defenders? I wouldn't be surprised in this period if Saliba makes more defensive contributions. Whether that will be enough to get past the threshold of 10 to get the 2 extra points, I don't know. But I would expect his DEFCON numbers to go up. As I say, I just think Arsenal will be deeper. That will naturally allow more crosses into the box and might allow him to make more clearances. Equally, for someone like Saliba, he may decide here that he has to play a bit more aggressively and change his role, should we call it that, as a defender, and that might make him step forward a little bit more. So I think there's that to bear in mind. So defensive duties, I think I just touched on that with Timber. And interestingly now, so a lot of us own Gabriel now because he's a set-piece threat. I touched it on this in the last pod I did on defenders, in terms of it could be a good now. I think we've got enough data, enough evidence, and enough eye test analysis to know who the main target is for team set pieces, whether that's long throws, whether that's corners. There's usually the same player that's repeatedly the target. It's Gabriel for Arsenal. So I think Ballard for Sunderland is one, Nathan Collins at Brentford. What will Arsenal do now? Because Saliba isn't aggressive in that way. His job is normally to try and block the goalkeeper. He'll be loitering around the 6-yard box for a knockdown or something like that, but he's not going to be the person tasked with going to attack the corner, attack the long throw. I don't see it being another defender. Rice takes them. I wonder here if this will make Arsenal play Mikel Moreno more in this next batch of games. I think he's their second best header of a football behind Gabriel. At the moment, I haven't heard the latest injury update for Gyökeres, but obviously Moreno has been playing as the number 9 lately. Even if a striker comes back, Arsenal still have the option of playing Moreno as the 10 and sticking Eze out wide on the left and maybe dropping Trossard. I think that's something that could happen. Or Eze might just be rotated in and out of the team while he's still learning the system. But I wouldn't be surprised with Gabriel out, especially if it's only for relatively short period, 2 to 4 weeks, that Moreno almost becomes nailed in this block, whether that's as a 9, whether that's as a 10, because it's such a weapon for Arsenal to have set piece threat and someone to go after the Saka corners and the Rice corners and try and get on the end of them. Moreno is clearly the second best option for this. So his stock, I think, goes up here in this period. He's 5.9 in FPL. So you could be getting the Arsenal centre forward for 5.9. Worst case, say you're getting someone with quite an advanced position and someone we know is going to be a big target from the set pieces and more an increased target from the set pieces. So he, I think, comes onto radar. I don't think it'll be another defender here that takes on that duty that Gabriel had to attack every set piece. It's possible Hincipie could do it, but I think there's a bit of a drop-off realistically between Gabriel's capabilities and Hincipie's capabilities for attacking these balls and being the threat that he is. I think Moreno could replace Gabriel directly. Final sort of question I ask myself about Gabriel here is, what do I want most? Do I want to move sideways if he's out for a month to another Arsenal defender? I've already spoken about Timber and Saliba a bit in this video. Or do I look to move to another team? Obviously, around Gabriel's price point is Van Dijk. I've already seen on socials that seems to be quite a well-touted move because Liverpool have good fixtures. I think Gvardiol's the same, good fixtures. Or I said I did that defender pod last week, and Nathan Collins, I thought, came out of that looking quite promising. Do I hate the idea of going from Gabriel to Nathan Collins at the moment? Obviously frees up some money. I think what partly comes into this as well is how quickly will I want Gabriel back? So let's just say we sell him this game week because we don't get clarity on when he's back, but we get information that he's definitely out of this game week. If he's only going to miss one game, I think there's an argument you just keep him and leave him on the bench. But again, this period of the season, there's a lot of games quite close together. Clearly, he will be, I think, rotated, particularly if he's carrying some sort of injury, even if it's manageable with strapping or with medication or something like that. I still think he'll miss some games, but doesn't necessarily mean the league ones. Really, I think I want some clarity. He's going to miss more than 2. I think if he's going to miss 2 games, I would probably sell him. If he was going to miss 2 or less, then I think there's a valid argument to keep him. But have it in mind that if you sell him, is it going to be as soon as he's back in the team, as soon as we find out that he's back in training or he's in the squad or Arteta makes some positive comment? Are we going to want him back immediately? And that might dictate what sort of punt you go for, because I don't think he'll be out for too long. And there's always the option, I guess, particularly if you go to away from Arsenal, you got the freedom to hold players. What you don't want to do, I think, is move Gabriel to Timber, put yourself back on triple Arsenal, and then I think it becomes more difficult to move one of the Arsenals to fund to get to Gabriel again. I think if you did do, for example, Gabriel to Van Dijk, you've obviously got the option of keeping Van Dijk longer term and switching another one of your defenders to Gabriel, where you're blocking yourself from doing that if you do Gabriel to Timber or Gabriel to Saliba. So something to bear in mind. I think, I'm at the mindset right now that when he is back, I'll probably want to get him back straight away. Obviously, in game week 16, we get everyone gets 5 free transfers. So that makes it easier to make luxury moves, like sideways Arsenal moves from one defender to another. Will you want to wait till then, or will you want to get him back sooner? So for those that know they want him back straight away and have got decent defensive coverage at the moment, it might just be worth holding him. Here's sort of my team going into game week 12. I've got 2 free transfers at the moment and 0.9 million in the bank. So plenty of opportunity here if Gabriel is out to move him on. My gut feeling is I probably will move to another Arsenal defender. I made the point here near the bottom of do I want Van Dijk instead of double Arsenal defence or alongside double Arsenal defence? And I've been looking at him. I'd already sort of considered 2-3 weeks ago that he could be a transfer in for me for this block. And I was going to do it when I sold Joel Pedro to Thiago, which is going to happen either this week or next week. Obviously, next week, Thiago's got Burnley. This, in theory, is the end of Chelsea's best run. They've still got okay fixtures after, but I think Pedro can go to Thiago after this week. I'm not against doing it in this week, though. But once I free up the money from that, then I've got plenty of options with my transfers. And I was then looking at doing Thiago, who's the defender I'm least happy with out of mine at the moment, up to Van Dijk. And that would have put me with Gabriel, Van Dijk, Lacroix, and Senesi. That was a loose plan, or one sort of plan I had. Obviously, I can still get most of that, but it's Van Dijk instead of. And I'm not confident on Liverpool enough, but they didn't show very well in my defensive pod last week. They're sort of bottom half team at the moment for XGC. They've not shown me enough, I don't think, in the last block repeatedly to think that even though they've got good fixtures on paper, that means they're going to get clean sheets. I think a lot more games right now are closer. This isn't a couple of years ago where the best teams in the league were probably 70% favourites to win most games. I think that gap has reduced even for Arsenal and Man City. A lot of games now before kickoff are closer. And even if it looks like Liverpool will do well against, for example, last year's promoted teams and Nottingham Forest, those sorts of fixtures, from what I've seen from Liverpool, I don't have no faith here that they're going to keep clean sheets in a half or 2/3 of these games. So I'll happily own Van Dijk because I think the clean sheet ceiling is higher for them than other teams. He's obviously got possibilities of DEFCON and goal threat as well. But I don't think Liverpool will keep more clean sheets than Arsenal in this block. So when you're buying defenders, clean sheets are the priority. They're the bread and butter. They're the things that get you the most points. And if we're being honest right now, so many of us in the game have double Arsenal defence that if Arsenal do keep a clean sheet, we don't really win week to week. Unless you've got a specific defender who gets an attacking return or something like that gives you a little bit of a one-up on other managers. In general, anyone that's had double Arsenal defence lately, if one of them's been Gabriel, hasn't really mattered who the second one is, but we're roughly getting the same points as other managers. Here, and I do think I think it will be common for people to sell Gabriel to a Van Dijk. That means that managers are now going into this next block with only one Arsenal defender. And that might be fair enough because if you're a fixtures manager, you look at this next batch of fixtures for Arsenal and think they're more likely to concede in this, and maybe they are. But if I'm going to start being a bit different to the template and I'm looking for opportunities to go against the template, there's a small window here where my differential is double Arsenal defence when people only have one. That's a differential I can be on board with. I'd much rather have that differential than take on Mateta with Voltemada or take on Enzo Fernandez with Ismail Assar or Reinders with Minte and all these sorts of things. They're obviously valid enough differential punts as well. But it feels like there's big risk and variance in that. And you're picking punty players and hoping you hit a streak. There's a reliability we know of with Arsenal defence. It's been there probably the whole calendar year. Certainly been there this season. They're a long way, in my opinion, the best defence in the league. If I can have an extra one and be ahead of most FPL teams as a differential, I want that. So, yeah, I'm not a fan personally of moving Gabriel to Van Dijk. I'm happy. I wouldn't put people off owning Van Dijk with double Arsenal defence. I don't think Van Dijk is a terrible pick in isolation, but not instead of. So, most likely for me is if I move Gabriel, I think it will be to either Timber or Saliba. And I'm not really sure yet. I need to sort of formulate a plan on how I think Timber's role will change. At least with Saliba, his minutes are there. But he doesn't have much goal threat. Doesn't really get DEFCON. He's basically the defender equivalent of David Raya in some ways. He's going to get 2 or 6 points most weeks. Maybe he could sneak some BPS. But if Arsenal are going to play slightly differently, which boosts Saliba's chances of DEFCON, and this is where you have to take your gut feeling and your individual assessment of football. You have to trust yourself here. I think his DEFCON numbers will go up, but I'm not sure yet whether that's enough to get him past 10. So at the moment, my chosen move would be to do Gabriel to Timber or Saliba. We'll wait for more information. It's possible I just do that this week. If Gabriel's out for that extended period, that might just be my one move, and I'll roll the other one and do 2 next week when I can do Thiago to Collins at that point. I can do Pedro to Thiago and get the 2 Brentford players in for when they play Burnley. That's an option for me. But I say I'm not against here doing 2 moves this week. Pedro to Thiago would have to be 1 to fund it, but that would then put me up to 2.1 in the bank. The long-term plan now isn't to hold Dewsbury Hall. I got Elliot Anderson in recently, and the plan was to make him my 5th mid and realistically my 8th attacker. And if I have to play him sometimes, that's fine. I played him last week, got the lucky late penalty that he scored. And I'm likely to play him this week away to Liverpool because I think he'll get DEFCON. And Liverpool are quite open. Who knows, he might score. Who knows, he might take a pen. So I'm okay playing him this week, but it's not ideal. But if I did 2 transfers, let's say Gabriel is short-term injured, I'll just play Alderete away to Fulham. I can be okay with that. Worst case, Thiago has to play against Man City. Not ideal, but again, not really worth a transfer. I can use my 2 transfers to do Pedro to Thiago and then upgrade Dewsbury Hall. Then I won't have to play Elliot Anderson. So, again, options. Ismaila Sarr is probably the player I'll phrase it like this, most scared of. I think he's someone that in this next block could do very well. Obviously, Palace have a lot of games. He's someone that is more likely than most to pick up a hamstring injury. He's a waiting transfer because of AFCON. But I do think at the moment, lots of managers will resort to being a bit passive. I did a pod about being proactive and passive about a month ago. And I think this is a period where lots of people will want to set up now for the midterm, for the long term. I certainly don't think people will be bringing in AFCON players for this block because it's so short term. But if I'm of the belief Sarr's going to have a really strong 3 or 4 game weeks here before he goes off, then I don't want to miss out on those points. I think he's the player I'm most nervous about not having. So I quite like the thought of doing Dewsbury Hall to Sarr, and obviously I'd have Sarr against Wolves if I did that. And what would I rather have here? Thiago playing Brighton and Sarr playing Wolves, or João Pedro playing Burnley and Anderson playing Liverpool? Seems a bit daft to sell João Pedro right before Burnley, but the 2 moves might give me a better team overall. So I could do that. Enzo is probably the player, as much as he's been frustrating for owners lately, I'm looking at him a little bit as the long-term pick in the spot I've currently got for Dewsbury Hall. But do I want that short-term pit stop onto Sarr? Or, as I've just spoken about sort of on the last slide, do I punt Moreno here? If I think he's going to be good here for 2 or 3 weeks, playing centre forward, target of all the set pieces, more reliable minutes than normal, he could be a massive differential for 5.9. And I have him as my 3rd Arsenal instead of Sarr. The problem becomes if Gabriel comes back, whilst I've still got Moreno, it's 2 moves, isn't it, to get Gabriel back from Moreno, because I won't have an Arsenal actual defender. It'll be Raya, Moreno, Saka. So to get Gabriel in, it's 2 moves. That feels like excessive just to punt Moreno. But I can be a bit maverick in times in FPL. And if I see sort of an avenue towards something that I feel quite strongly about, then I'm usually quite tempted to go down that path. And I've got a big temptation to get Moreno in at the moment. I feel like he, at a time when midfielders are quite hard to predict, you're getting the best team in the league and you're getting a midfielder playing centre forward who's the target of all the set pieces. I actually quite like this, and he's quite lowly owned. So I'll need some more validity really on how long Gabriel is going to be out. If it looks like it's going to be about a month, that's probably my preferred move right now, to turn Dewsbury Hall into Moreno. I've got the exact money in the bank. No, I'm 0.1 short, so I will have to do the second move as well. But heading down that road is my most likely. And then I say at the bottom there, Thiago to Collins is probably a likely move in game week 13. I really like Collins for this next run. Thiago's not delivered expectation. I've basically not learned from my own mistakes with him. I had Romero, who looked like he had some set piece threat, but wasn't really reliable for DEFCON and played for a team that couldn't really be trusted defensively. And then I moved him on to Thiago, who basically Newcastle become another team you can't trust defensively. He's not reliable for DEFCON either, and not much goal threat. You've almost picked a defender that the 3 main things you look at doesn't offer reliability for any of them. And I've made the mistake once with Romero, and then I've moved him out and made it again with TL. Maybe at the time Newcastle's defensive numbers were good, but I kind of regret doing that move a little bit. So I'm quite keen to move him on, despite Newcastle having a decent batch of games coming up. I think I'd quite like Collins, who at least offers DEFCON and a set piece threat at the moment. So that will be coming, I think, in the next block, realistically, in game week 13 to have that in place. I've still got a bench boost to use. And might be another reason for me to shift Gabriel on, because I think it's possible for my squad to play it in game week 13. But as we know at the moment, it's a bit stupid, a bit foolhardy to try and play 1 week in advance because injuries happen, etc., etc. But it's on my mind that game week 13 bench boost is on. That's kind of it for this pod. So that's, all the things I'm sort of considering and weighing up around Gabriel. And I don't think it's quite as easy as move to Van Dijk. I think there's lots of things you have to consider around how Arsenal might play tactically, who directly replaces Gabriel in responsibilities, roles and duties on the pitch. And that might help you, that way of football thinking might help you make a better FPL transfer, a better FPL decision. That'll probably be it now before the game week 13. What are we on? Game week 12 deadline. Sorry. Yeah, game week 12. Then I could do something later in the week if there's another big talking point. I've got a little bit of time. But if not, I'll be back before the game week 13 deadline. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll speak to you all soon.